Wouldn't that be a really cool place if our lives could have more to do with beauty than they do pain? Probably as many of us watch that, we could just sense some of the hurt that happens in the world. And your hurt may have been a little bit different than that hurt, but it's hurt nonetheless. And all of us, we have a past, and we have to deal with that past so that we can move forward in life. We have I'm the coach of a soccer team, and this was 2 weeks ago on Monday, so 13 days ago. It was 5:55 in the afternoon. I was on field number 3 at Tranquility Park. Now, the opponent was a familiar one. I've lost to him 5 consecutive seasons. None of the games have been very close at all. We went over. The referee and his 2 assistants were coming to greet us at midcourt, and I practiced some of my Spanish on him. He laughs like he does every year, and I looked over at his team. This is a good team. The blue and white jerseys, they're kicking the ball up in the air, and these kids understand soccer. They played it ever since they can walk. The culture embraces the game. These kids, they love to play. They're a great team. Then I looked at my players. Black shoes, black socks, black shorts, black shirts. These kids are athletic. They love to compete. They're not quite as polished as a soccer team, but for the first time in a long time, they were playing not as 11 individuals, but one team. The game was getting ready to get started, and I was thinking, are we going to lose again this year to these guys? I looked at the coach, I looked at the players, and I remember the beat downs. I remember, we've been out-coached, we've been outplayed, pretty much out-everythinged by these guys. Now, I believe that we could win. I really believed it. Our kids, they had won 3 of their last 4 games. I have the best goalie in the league. I mean, this kid can play. The kids, they had just, they had started to play well. But I asked the kids, it wasn't like the typical pregame speech, X's and O's. It was, do you guys believe you can win this game? I looked down at all, I had like 12 of them there that night. I looked at, you guys can believe you can win this game. It's kind of like in Bible school, like when you ask kids a question, like the right answer is Jesus. Like there's a few of them that said, yeah, we believe. I said, no, do you really believe that you can win this game? I said, you guys are fit. You always outplay people in the second half. You've gotten a lot better. You've won 3 or less. Do you believe you can win this game? And a few of the kids actually believed that they could do it. So then I said, do you want to win this game? And they said, yeah, we want to win. I said, you guys have played teams that they have played, and you've played them just as well, and you guys can do this. And I said, do you believe you can win this game? And pretty soon, all 12 of them looked up at me. And I don't know if all 12 of them believed it or not, but most of them did. And they said, yeah, we believe that we can win this game. Now, this was a defining moment for this team. It was defining, and you've had these moments before as well. You've had some losses, you've had some setbacks, you've had some failures. And there comes a defining moment in your life when you face the giant again. Do you believe that you can succeed this time? Do you believe that you can grow and do better than you've ever done before? Do you believe you can win where you've never won? Do you believe there can be progress where there hasn't been a lot of progress? Now, the kids that come back to this, if you don't believe that you can win, guess what? You're not going to win. If you don't believe you're going to succeed, you're not going to succeed. If you don't believe you're going to grow, you're not going to grow. If you don't believe that you can change, then you are not going to change. And I'm not just talking about soccer here. Now, you guys have lost soccer games before, something very similar. There's been times when someone's hurt you. There's been times that you've hurt somebody. There's been times when you set a goal and you didn't accomplish it. There's been times when you didn't follow through on a commitment. There's been a time where you wasted time. There's been a time when you wasted money. There's a time that you've given up, and there's a time that you've quit. You're no different than this soccer team. I'm no different than this soccer team. We've been there, we've done that, and we got the t-shirt. Now, spiritually, I think many of us have failed as well. Like, is there anybody in here really that's just totally content and happy with where you are in your relationship with God? I don't think there's too many of us. I think we've attempted to pray, and we weren't able to focus. We weren't able to be consistent. Maybe we thought that God wasn't hearing our voice. We've tried to continually read the scriptures, and we got through the first couple chapters, and we weren't really sure what the stuff meant or that God was speaking to us, so we didn't continue. We've tried to put faith before fear. We tried to love others as Jesus loved them. We've attempted to live as people who are fully forgiven. You've heard the preacher talk about forgiveness before. And you've attempted to live as someone who's fully forgiven, yet the past, it still lingers with us. Now, you've had some success at this. I know you have. There's been times when you felt that God was really close. There's been times that the scriptures were real. There's been times when the prayer was meaningful. There's been times when the forgiveness happened. But I would also say that many of us have our fair share of failures as well. Now, one of the things I want you to hear this morning is that failing does not make us a failure. You got that? Failing does not make us a failure. Now, failing, it may mean that we tried something and we didn't succeed. Failing may mean that we had a really bad day and we made a bad decision. Failing basically means that we're an imperfect person who doesn't always think and speak and act the way that we should. Now, there's a paramount difference between failing and being a failure. Now, everyone who grows, everyone who succeeds, everyone who prevails, everyone who changes, everybody who wins, they understand this. Because all these people have more than enough evidence and they have more than enough experience to believe that they are actually failures. But they persist and they continue anyway. And what they do is they grow, they succeed, they prevail, and they win. Now, I want you to think about your life, whether it's spiritual or relational or emotional or whatever. This is your moment of truth. Just like that soccer team who had failed 5 consecutive times to beat this team over 5 consecutive seasons. This is your moment of truth. There's some kind of obstacle that you're facing in your life right now. There's some type of challenge that you're facing in your life right now. And are you going to linger in the past and remember that you failed before, that you've not succeeded before, or are you going to learn and do your absolute best to move forward? Now, I would say this, that whether you're thinking like financially, emotionally, relationally, physically, or even spiritually, I think that many of us have created prison cells that we have constructed with fortified floors of failure and brawny bars of breakdowns. Now, Paul, he knew about this. He was a failure. He had a past. And Paul, he actually knew what it was like to be in a prison, because this letter to the Philippians that he wrote this letter to the Philippians from a prison in southern Europe. And what Paul says is, I was circumcised when I was 8 days old. I am a pure-blooded citizen of Israel and a member of the tribe of Benjamin, a real Hebrew if there ever was one. I was a member of the Pharisees who demanded the strictest obedience to the Jewish law. I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church, and as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without fault. Now, Paul basically is telling the people in Philippi who he was. He said, I was born a Jew. He's proud of that. Not only was he born a Jew, he was circumcised on the 8th day. And what this meant is that his family did things to the letter of the law. Now, he's not just a Jew. He's not just from a family who does things the way they're supposed to do them. He continues and he says, I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, when he says that he's from the tribe of Benjamin, what this means is that he's the best of the best. The tribe of Benjamin is not the biggest tribe, but it's the best. I mean, if you're from the tribe of Benjamin, that means that you're somebody. And he also says, there's no impurities in my blood. All my ancestors, they're Jews from the tribe of Benjamin as well. And then he continues. He says, I'm not just a Jew. I wasn't just circumcised on the 8th day. I'm not just from the tribe of Benjamin, who's a pure-blooded person. I'm a Pharisee. And that meant something. Like when Paul said that he was a Pharisee, everyone knew exactly what he was talking about. This meant that he was smart. This meant that he was educated. This meant that he was devoted, that he did the things that he was supposed to do. He knew the things that he was supposed to know. Paul was a somebody. A lot of times when we talk on Sunday morning, I talk about God's interaction with a bunch of nobodies. Paul wasn't a nobody. Paul was a somebody. He was important, but somebodies have something in common with nobodies. And that is that all of us, wherever you find yourself on this spectrum, none of us are immune to failure. It happens. Now, Paul, his failings were about as big as they get. There was his interaction with Stephen. You'll find this in Acts chapter 7 if you want to read it sometime. Stephen was filled with the Holy Spirit. He was filled with the love of God. Stephen was filled with the love of other people. He lived and he acted and he spoke in a way that people just hadn't done that before. He was an emerging leader in this emerging movement known as Christianity. And the Jewish people, they found Stephen to be a big threat. If what Stephen was saying was true, about Christ, not just being a prophet, but being God, then everything that all these people held so dear, it was threatened. And what do you do when you're threatened? You either back into a corner or you fight, and these guys came out fighting. So they tried Stephen. They didn't sentence Stephen to prison. They didn't exile him. Actually, what they did is they sentenced him to death. Now, it was a very cruel form of death. What they did is they took a bunch of rocks. They said, Stephen, you got this God, and you won't denounce him. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you stand against that wall over there. And one by one, the Jewish leaders, they stood probably about 10 to 12 feet from him, probably about as far as I am from the people in the front row. And just like a baseball pitch, they took the rocks, like the round rocks and the sharp rocks and the big rocks and the little rocks. Have you ever been hit by one of these things? They just threw it as hard as they could. Now, some of them, of course, missed, but some of them hit Stephen. Hit Stephen in the leg, it hit him in the chest, hit him in the face, hit him in the head. Stephen had been hit by enough rocks, and he fell to the ground. But he wasn't dead at this point. So the leaders, they took more rocks, and he was laying down. They threw the rock down as hard as they could. And that's why Stephen is a martyr. He was killed by the Jewish people for believing what he believed, for speaking what he spoke, and for acting the way that he did. Now, Paul was there. You go to Acts chapter 8, verse 1. It says Saul, and this was his name before he was changed. Saul was one of the witnesses, and he agreed completely with the killing of Stephen. Now, Paul could have done something about this. He could have. He was a Pharisee. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was a leader. And he would have said, guys, no, this isn't going to happen. This is not going to happen. They would have stopped there dead in their tracks, but he didn't do a darn thing about it. Now, not only did Paul not do a darn thing about it, chapter 8, verse 3, it continues. Saul was going everywhere to destroy the church. He went from house to house, dragging out both men and women to throw them into prison. Can you imagine that? Like, these two little kids are playing in the front of the house, and all of a sudden these three thugs come in, and they hear that the dad's a recent convert to Christianity, and they beat him up in front of the kids, and they put him in handcuffs, and they haul him off to jail, and they leave the wife and the kids at the house all alone, vulnerable, and they haul this man off to prison for something that he didn't do. That was Paul. He did that. He watched a man be stoned to death. He threw innocent people in jail. He separated families. And Paul, he knew that this was wrong. He had to know that this was wrong. There is nothing in the Hebrew Scriptures, and Paul knew these Scriptures like the back of his hand. There is nothing in these Hebrew Scriptures that would justify this type of behavior. Paul knew the story of Abraham. This is a story of hope and promise. Paul knew the story of Isaac. This is a story of laughter. Paul knew the story of Jacob, which is a story of redemption. Paul had to know what he was doing was wrong, and Paul also had to know that grace happens. Even Paul he has his conversion in the next chapter, in chapter 9. Even though he hadn't had his conversion yet, he has to know that grace happens. It happens to doubters like Abraham. to helpless people like Isaac, to scoundrels like Jacob, and to thugs like him. He had to know that grace happens. Now Kierkegaard writes, God creates out of nothing. So think about the world. The mountains, the oceans, the plains. God creates out of nothing. Wonderful, you say? Yes, to be sure. But what he does is still more wonderful. He makes saints out of sinners. He did it with Paul. And he can do it with all of us. You know, we have a choice. I mean, we can respond to God's grace. We can let the past defeat us. We can let the past define us, or we can let the past develop us. That's your choice. It's nobody else's choice. It's your choice. It's not your parents' choice. It's not your spouse's choice. It's not anybody's choice except your own. Do you really want to let your past defeat you? So I haven't won before and I can never win again. Or do you want to let it define you? Yeah, I'm a loser. I'm the one that can't follow through on the commitments. I'm the one that has just failed and will continue to fail because my past is defining me. Or do you want to be the person who lets your past develop you? You see, I believe that change is possible in all of our lives because I believe that our God is a God who changes lives. We see it in Paul's life. I see it in your lives. We see this time and time again that our God is a God who changes lives. Now, the biggest discovery that Paul made happens in Acts chapter 9. Paul has taken a 135-mile journey from Jerusalem to Damascus. It is on this journey that Paul experiences God firsthand. You know, God just knocks Paul down into the sand. God and Paul have this conversation. All of a sudden, even though Paul was walking 135 miles, it was in a single moment when Paul made this huge, huge step from just knowing about God to knowing God. And there is a huge difference in our lives when we can move from knowing about God to fully knowing God. Now, as a Pharisee, Paul knew about God. His training was in the Hebrew Bible. It was extensive. His religion was a religion of devotion and sacrifice and ritual. You know, Paul, he saw God's love as something that he was going to earn. And then one day on that journey, everything changed. What he discovered is that the religion that he was practicing was wrong because he was trying to earn God's love and a God that he knew about, but all of a sudden he knew God. He went from knowing about God to knowing God. And we read this in verse 7. I once thought these things were valuable, like my family, my education, my sacrifice and devotion. I once thought they were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless because when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake, I have discarded everything else, counted it all as garbage, so that I could gain Christ and become one with him. I no longer count. Think about this for all of us that are trying to work out our salvation. Listen to what Paul says here. I no longer count on my own righteousness through obeying the law. Rather, I become righteous through faith in Christ. Now you can see what God's doing here, can't you? God is transforming a sinner into a saint. Now there's something that's not happening here. The sinner does not transform the sinner into the saint. God transforms the sinner into the saint. And in the foundation that God uses is knowing him and our experience with him. Now there's a big difference between knowing about and knowing. Like a few years ago, there's this building that was being built across the street from our house. Now, when there's a building being built across the street from your house, you're always kind of curious what it is. And they finished the building, and one of the tenants moved in right away, and it was a place called Curves. So you're familiar with Curves? You know, they put a little carpet in there and, you know, some weight machines, and these people go in and they lift some weights and do some stretches, and you may get like on a treadmill or a stair treadmill or something like that. And yeah, that wasn't interesting. I think you'd only be a woman to join there, so I wasn't terribly interested in me. And but the other one was like top secret. Like it was like they weren't telling anybody what it was going to be. And one day, word in the street leaked out that it was this place called Lamar's Donuts. Now, I thought, man, there's a great opportunity for some cross-marketing here. But I haven't seen them do that yet. But so all of a sudden, I was researching Lamar's Donuts. I had never been to Lamar's Donuts before. Never been in an area of the country that has it. It turned out they were founded in Kansas City in 1960. The dude was making donuts since like 1933. I read that they made 18 million donuts per year, 27 stores, 6 states. I even went on Yelp and TripAdvisor and was reading some of the reviews, and one of them was, they call it the ultimate indulgence, tender and airy. One said it was simply a better donut. Now at that point, here was my relationship with Lamar's Donuts. I knew about Lamar's Donuts. I knew what they looked like. I knew where they were, how many they were. I knew the different donuts. But we can't just leave it at that, can we? So the first day the store opened, I went to Lamar's Donuts. All of a sudden, knowing about Lamar's Donuts was no longer good enough for me. The store's open, and I went and I bought a donut. And I remember the donut I bought was the Lamar's bar, filled with Bavarian cream. Now, all of a sudden, I'm starting to know Lamar's Donuts. Seriously, I can feel this thing is soft. It smells. Can you smell it? You can smell it. It smells so good. Okay, so I'm I'm starting to know this company, and I'm starting to like it a lot. So then, this Bavarian, I gotta try this. So here's what I thought when I was doing this. I know my mom told me to not talk with my mouth full, but you just gotta go someplace after this. I was thinking, man, if I had any doubts that God doesn't exist, they're gone now. This donut is that good. So I want you to think about that. I want you to think about you and your relationship with God. Is God someone that you know about? Or is God someone that we are knowing more and more and more each day? Now for Paul, he had a taste of God on the journey to Damascus. He heard God. He felt God. And for Paul, that choice is obvious. All his beliefs, all his behaviors, they were gone. They were garbage. Because now he knew God. He wanted to experience the taste and the sweetness of God the rest of his days. Now Paul writes about this in verse 9. For God's way of making us right with himself depends on faith. Not what we do, but on what we believe. Listen to what it says. I want to know Christ. He doesn't say I want to know about Christ. I want to know Christ and experience the mighty power that raised him from the dead. I want to suffer with him, sharing in his death, so that in one way or another I will experience the resurrection from the dead. Now, Paul was tired. Paul was tired when he was walking on that road to Damascus. He was tired of defending a religion that he didn't even know if he believed in. He was tired of trying to win God's approval. He was tired of serving a demanding religion. He was tired of trying to be perfect. And what God gave Paul that one day was exactly what Paul needed. And that is to know him, to experience the same resurrection that Christ himself experienced. Now, here's what happens when we know. Here's what happens when we experience the resurrection. All of a sudden, death is replaced by life. Guilt is replaced by grace. The hatred of people is replaced by the love of people. Competition is replaced with collaboration. All of a sudden, the tiring works that we do are replaced by a life-giving faith. Now for Paul, he had to do something to make this happen in his life. And what that was is he could no longer linger in his past. Yeah, he messed up. He saw Stephen die. He messed up, and he had to let that go. He had to no longer linger, but to learn. There was all those innocent people that Paul threw into jail. He had to get over that. He says, I can no longer linger in this, but I have to learn from it. Now listen to what he says in verse 12 as he concludes this text. He says, I don't mean to say that I've already achieved these things. He says, I'm not even there yet. I keep making mistakes. Yeah, I'm not achieving these things, or that I have already reached perfection, but I press on to possess that perfection for which Christ Jesus has possessed me. No, dear brothers and sisters, I have not achieved it, but I focus on this one thing. So for all of us who carry baggage, for all of us who have failed to develop a prayer life, for all of us who have hurt somebody else, for all of us who carry some bitterness and resentment, here's what Paul says. What I do is I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Jesus Christ, is calling us. Now, Paul did not linger in his past. What he did is he learned from his past. Now, the question is, this is your defining moment. What's you going to do? Are you going to linger? Or are you going to learn? Now, I believe that all of us can learn. I believe that all of us, like Paul, can respond to God's grace and move forward. So the boys, they won the coin toss. They kick the ball back, they pass the ball around, and we have a play that we do at the start of the game where our big kicker kicks it to the fast person, and the play usually doesn't work, but it gets the ball deep into the other side's territory, and this time the play worked. The big kicker got the ball to the speedy guy guy got behind the defenders, and within 30 seconds we were ahead 1-0. Now all of a sudden I saw the kids, they were believing, we can do this. 5 minutes into the game we had a corner kick, perfectly executed. It's like 1 out of 100 thing for us, but it worked this time. The kid knocked the ball into the goal with his head. We're ahead 2-0. Now all of a sudden it's halftime, still 2-0, and Benny, you're there. I said, do you guys believe you can win? Yeah, we believe we can win. We believe we can win. Yes, the other team, they moved their defenders up to forward, and they put us under a lot of pressure. What they also did was compromise their defense, and we scored 4 more goals, and the boys won 6-0. Now, it's just U13 soccer. Don't get excited. It's not like the Class A state championship here, but there is a point to this story, okay? These boys did something that they had never been able to do before. And here's the lesson that they learned, and here's the lesson that I want us to learn. When you believe that you can succeed, you can succeed. When you believe that you can grow, you can grow. When you believe that you can change, you can change. When you believe that you can win, you can win. Now, how this works for us is it's time for us to stop lingering and to start learning. It's time for us to put our past behind and to move forward. Maybe somebody hurt you, or maybe you hurt somebody, and the next step for you is either forgiveness or just moving forward. Maybe for some of us, money has just managed us instead of us managing our money, and maybe the next step for you is, a budget and sticking to that budget. Maybe for some of us, we just don't feel very good physically. So we're gonna exercise and we're gonna eat healthy, and you can forget that sermon illustration from about 5 minutes ago. That was just a point that I was trying to make. Or we're going to sleep more, have less stress. Maybe we haven't been able to do that before, but you can do this. In the next 4 weeks, what we're going to look at is spiritual. There's people that can help you with these other things, but as the church, we look at things about God. Now, I wonder how many of us have ever said, I'm going to create some time and space in my life where I'm going to connect to God, even in the midst of my busyness and my hectic schedule. That's what we're going to look at next week. We're going to look at creating environments where we can accept and respond to God's grace in our life. I wonder how many of us, we're not excited about reading the Bible because we've tried it before, and we read through a couple chapters and we didn't know if God was speaking to us. We didn't always understand what God was saying, and we just gave up. Well, in 2 weeks, we're going to look at how is it that we read the scriptures and apply them to our life. In 3 weeks, we're going to look at how is that we develop a meaningful prayer life. And this is going to do 2 things for us. It's going to connect us to God, and it's going to connect us to other people. And on the last week, and I know that many of you have great friends. I know that many of you have great families. But the last week, we're going to look at what it is like to have people that are going to point us and direct us closer to God, people that that they see part of their life as helping us to grow spiritually. Now, I believe that all of us can respond to God's grace. I believe that God's greatest creation is not the mountains or the oceans or the plains or everything in between. I believe that God's greatest creation is what he is going to do in all of us by changing us from being a sinner to a saint. Now, when we get to that place, or even as we're getting to that place, if we take this journey, if we respond to God's grace, if we do what we haven't done before, God is going to, and just think about what this is going to look like for you. God is going to move us to a place of balance and harmony. God is going to move us to a place of forgiveness and peace. God is going to move us to a place of deep friendship and compassion toward others. And God is going to move us to one more place, and these are 3 words that this guy that watched all these people throw these rocks, they're 3 words that he wrote. You know, there's 3 words that guy that took those people out of their houses and separated the men from their kids, they're 3 words that he wrote. And God is going to move us to this place of faith, hope, and love. So let us pray.